whatsoever, that can give us a kind of awesome sense of, one, certain powerlessness in all of it, and on the other hand, a certain power. Like anything that I do will carry a result. So many of us could say, I don't know how to do it, but at least I aspire that every last thought, every last deed would be something positive that would bear its fruit. It's pretty easy to imagine that. Well, it's difficult to have our mind fall into that place automatically all the time. But mostly our habitual patterns happen automatically all the time anyway, so we understand how you get there. You just keep repeating the thing, and pretty soon you discover, hey, I didn't even try to do that, it just happened. That's going to happen anyway, whether you play any role in it or not. So you may as well play a role. And then we can see, the Buddha said, you can't see all those connections. Well, that should kind of come to the point of a sense of duh. I can't taste every drop of salt water in the ocean either, just to check and see whether it's salty too. But we know, by virtue of having tasted so much, that yeah, it is. It must be.
Well, I loved your image of the rock into the pond, which it's a simple image, but when you think about it, even the rock falls down into the water, we don't know it's going to hit the bottom of the pond.
You don't know. We just have all day long, all night long. We have no idea what the result will necessarily be. But the point of the practice is that, in a certain way, it sounds counter to Buddhist principles, but what we're really trying to do is develop a certain kind of habitual pattern. Mm-hmm. And that pattern, if played out far enough, will actually undo itself. But in the short run, it gives us a habitual pattern which is at least useful for ourselves and for others. That's my 2 bits worth on it. Let's see, now the other thing was... What was your other thing? Did you...
Some kind of practice.
Judging.
What?
Judging.
Supporting practice?
Practical practice?
Mm-hmm. What you just said. Habituation.
Right. Anything behind what you've talked about already today that you'd point to?
Has something to do, or what? Yeah. Well, one thing is, the 4 things, and we haven't done them all yet, but part of your answer is in the 4th one.
Okay.
And that is that these 4 contemplations are in so many of the traditions and lineages. It's like, I don't personally know one very close that doesn't emphasize this. And we hear them so often that we feel... I know when Kala Rinpoche was around, it's like every teaching that he gave had the 4 thoughts in it. There weren't any exceptions until you started thinking, like if he said, we're going to do a teaching on the 4 thoughts, you thought, oh, wow, he's got again. So, and then I'd go and I'd fall asleep and then wake up and all these things. But it's emphasized so much not because it's a beginner's practice, but because it's the foundation of every practice. Even after 2 years on retreat, the long retreatants spent 2 months doing nothing but the 4 thoughts. And predictably, what was their response when they heard, oh no, we're going to do this now? And yet, every one of them said, maybe the most inspiring 2 months of the entire retreat. So that's the other side of it, is that if you can actually rest your awareness on those things and contemplate them and get them, you start to get a sense of like deep gratitude for precious human existence. And then like, what do I do now? And they've got all the tools, so they just have to kind of push them along, make them go, and when they stop, you push them a little more, and then it comes around. So on the one hand, they're beginning practices. On the other hand, they're right there at the most advanced practices too. They don't go away, which tells you that they are very important. You're a human being living with other humans and all, and you can't appreciate that you're a human being living with other humans and all. You haven't yet entered the path in a certain way. There has to be a sense of appreciation of what we have. And there shouldn't be any judgment around that. You know, like, it wouldn't be right for me to say, you're not a good person because you don't fully understand this. That would be completely against the whole thing, and it would not be helpful, and the likelihood is you'd never come back. So it's like, it's clear that the nudge has to be kind of gentle and compelling at some level. And I think the fourth one we'll see. It's like, there's sort of a fifth one there that I cheated on and added it in. It's not, we'll see.
I have an extension of this contemplation. One of the things that's hardest about looking into circumstances and not immediately being drawn into the story and the judgments and whatnot is that we know both too much and not enough. So it's very, very difficult to look at our contemporary situation and look at it in a way where we know enough. It's just really hard. We know too much and not enough all at once. And if I think about one of the periods of history that I contemplate sometimes, that it's kind of a big enough thing that and people rarely don't know much about it. It's called the Warring States period in China, which lasted for about 300 years, during which the population of China, or that whole area, was reduced to about 30% from where it started. And so if I think about just sort of kind of parachuting into any moment in the kind of 150 years in, and thinking from my perspective, no, who's on first? Who, so-and-so did this, so-and-so. It's very easy to think in the middle of a situation like that everything that's happening depends on so many other things that happened, and that the sense of what choices people have is conditioned by all the things that have gone on. So you get in the middle of that. And one of the other reason that I like that is because it also challenges me to think of the aspect of developing discernment, which you kind of touched on that. It's like, obviously we know that stuff has consequences, because it's clear in the middle of the Warring States period, the things that happened did have consequences. It went on for 300 years because stuff kept happening. So really trying to engage that piece of it, but with some appreciation of like, oh, I couldn't just go in there and become Khan for the day and just set everybody straight. So I think it takes a lot of contemplation and stepping outside of our current circumstances before it's possible to kind of drop that sense, to see what it is, to drop the judgment while maintaining some sense of discernment. Because both of those, the one thing that I wince sometimes when we talk too much about no judgment is that sense of, ooh, well, but then it can become very nihilistic. Like, what? It doesn't matter. I drop all judgment. But it's not a matter of, the judgment in this case is that the kind of the self-centered need to be the right one, to be right and have the sense of, I understand it, and if everybody did what I said and what I think, then it would all work. So that's the piece of it. But that aspect of developing discernment in the middle of these things that's the real challenge.
That's a real challenge, yeah.
Because none of us are going to. Well, my mother, when I'm Tsarina, then none of us is going to get that. And even if we do, it's going to be even worse.
They're going to kill us before they let us do that anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
They kill you sooner or later.
Yes. Sooner as opposed to later.
Well, I really appreciated the focus today because you gave the teachings a couple years ago at the New Year's retreat. You gave, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, probably part of the refuge. Was it that?
It was you. I just remember you going through the 4 thoughts that change the mind, and I so appreciated today you doing that again because, I hear it differently, and that I suppose is the nature of things too.
Yeah. Bill's point of the discernment, though, is actually a critical piece, and so it is. I think it is true that first, the most difficult thing is equanimity in relationship to others is very difficult. It's not our habit. And we think of ourselves as discerning, right? Long before we actually are discerning. We're just really rationalizing our actions and behaviors and all, and calling it discernment, if we use that word. But the discernment is actually really important. And it's not so difficult to understand that discernment in one sense, as a category. Wisdom is generally divided into two forms. There's discerning wisdom and there's non-discerning wisdom. The discerning wisdom is the one where you have advanced enough in understanding what you can do with your body, with your speech, with your mind that will actually be helpful for yourself and for others. So that you stop doing the things that bring about the suffering of samsara. You notice that when I'm really attached to myself and what other people think of me, I find myself in trouble most of the time. And so at a certain point, maybe I notice, this seems to be the problem. It's not others. It's me being attached to what they think of me, for example. And so then the issue is, how long does it take you before you can actually act on that in the midst of the pain of the real? So that's really what the path is about, for the most part, for a very long period of time. And the discerning wisdom also takes into account the creation of karma, so the causes and effects that we put in place that we know will bear their fruit at some point. We want to create causes that bring about positive things at some point. Even if there's no truth to karma whatsoever, even if that were true, even if we couldn't even witness it in the short term around, that would still be a wise and skillful thing to do, to develop that discerning wisdom. Even in a smaller context, it would still be the wise thing to do. But at a certain point, we might say enlightenment, then the discerning wisdom gradually disappears, and the non-discerning wisdom becomes the thing where there's no requirement to look at what we're doing, because the non-discerning wisdom is either already enlightened or it's just at the kind of the doorstep of it. Whatever is seen is immediately also met with the most appropriate, most skillful thing to do. So there's no, in one sense you could say, the judgment is at another level. It's not weighing pros and cons, it's just very clear. The example that Kala Rinpoche used to use, though in one way it's not a very good example, it nonetheless kind of points it out. When the mother is walking with the child and the child runs out into the traffic, they don't weigh the odds that the child will be hit or not hit. They're in the street rapidly, and even to the extent of breaking the child's arm to get it out of the way. And it's all skillful, it's all that discerning wisdom. Except in that case it's non-discerning. No thought, it's just obvious what the right thing is. So that's not actually an example of non-discerning wisdom. Non-discerning wisdom is just a kind of an analogy for it. Yeah, and the 4 thoughts are part of that whole thing, even though they're very simple to see and understand. they're critical, and we'll cover how those four thoughts actually come around in a full circle, and that all the way back to refuge and the enlightened attitude. Okay?
Yeah.
All right.
I don't understand how discerning wisdom is accomplished if we can't ever know the causes that are manifested.
Yeah.
So I can see a relative, well, I can look at what's present or what I know about the situation, but what I know is always limited. So
Yeah.
how can you have discerning wisdom?
Excuse us for a minute, we need to adjust the camera.
Oh,
Turn it counterclockwise.
The whole
The
we
whole
have an
thing.
emergency.
There you go.
A little bit more. A little bit more. There we go. No, that's too
Oh,
much.
you're turning that. I see.
There we go. That's good. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Where were you?
Shall do you understand you understand the question? Should I repeat it again?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't understand how we can arrive at a true discerning wisdom
Yeah.
if we have no way that we fully understand what's happening and the causes of what's. So I can see relative. I mean, we all make relative decisions about
Yeah.
what we know.
Yeah.
Do we just know larger and larger circles, and so we grow into greater discerning wisdom? But can we ever really have discerning wisdom?
Discerning or non-discerning?
Discerning.
Non-discerning looks easier, doesn't it? You
Yeah,
just do
it
what.
Whatever.
But it's based upon actually seeing the entire situation in its actual nature.
Well,
So-
yeah, but that's so far away that.
So far away that it's easy.
So
Right, I get it.
it's easy because that's like,
Yeah.
Ain't gonna happen, ain't gonna happen.
They can never hold this against me. Well, the discerning wisdom, in a way, I think this is part of the conundrum of the Buddha saying, and I'm sure that he must have wished that he wouldn't say it or didn't have to say it, that sentient beings in general they can't see all of these interconnections, which is as easy to understand as it is to realize how easy non-discerning wisdom is too, because I can't understand it. But what he was really just saying is the myriad of interconnections is impossible to fathom. So I think we would all say that doesn't therefore lead to a reasonable person concluding that there is no rational basis for discerning wisdom. The rational basis would be, or is, that understanding as much as you do that certain actions lead to suffering, you avoid those actions. Just in the most simple way. Of course, it can be like more complex, but the simplicity is that I see what causes trouble for myself and others, and I avoid that. Then there's the question of, how do I avoid that? How do I avoid that when my whole being wants to do something else? Like get a gun or something that I know is not the right thing to do. But people do this all the time, day and night, in the entire world. They do the very thing that brings them suffering because they are not clear about the connection between what they do with their body, speech, and mind and their own suffering and the suffering of others, which doubles back on them and causes suffering and so on. Seeing all of that relative phenomena, very relative phenomena, is the basis of discerning wisdom. And it's not complete, because if you could see the whole thing, then it would likely be the non-discerning wisdom at that point. But even right now, you can't see the whole thing. if you knew that there was going to be a meteor hit the sidewalk right where you were going to stand in 5 minutes, you wouldn't go. And if 20 people were going to stand there, you would get them out of the way. That would be, you could say that's what the whole thing looks like, but we don't see the whole thing. And we don't even see the relative things an awful lot of the time, where we're really just in our own habitual patterns, starting with the illusion of self and our enormous attachment to it, attachment to its well-being, psychically, physically, in so many ways. And so it's difficult when we have that gross level of attachment to something which is fundamentally an illusion. You can say if something isn't done about that, that's going to lead to some real trouble. And so we do our best to do something about it, to discriminate. Okay, I'm not going to do things that hurt me and others. Now, then the question is, how do you actually do that? Well, you do the best you can. You read about it, you meditate on it, you look at what you've done, what you're doing, what others are doing, how it's affecting you, kind of like a scientist actually, looking at yourself, like just investigating. Wow, I was really angry when this happened, and this other situation, I thought that person really liked me, and I felt like they betrayed me, and so on, and so you learn to like deal with those things in a different way, like in the mind training thing, one of the most famous aphorisms, drive all blame into one. And it's not that actually you are really taking the blame for everything that happens everywhere, but you're just taking responsibility for your own reactions, really, more than anything else. If you can take responsibility for your own reactions and discover how to work with that in a positive way, then you might actually say, just drive it into me. Doesn't matter. What's blame? It's not sharp, it's not pointed, it doesn't cut your head off, you know. So you can imagine at least getting to the place where that's okay. There was a joke at one point. I remember Colin Rinpoche used to say that, and there are numerous practices, not just in the mind training for this, where the practitioner takes full responsibility for the state of the entire world of samsara, entire world of confusion. Well, how do you take responsibility for that? It's kind of in the bandwidth of why not? You know, somebody's going to blame me for something anyway. I'm going to die anyway. I'm going to get sick anyway. Go home. There's so many rationalizations for just saying, okay, it's okay. And then you discover, well, that wasn't so bad, actually. You know, so what? There's a lot of experimenting to do, and a lot of apologies to make, and a lot of, looking at your own mind. And there's a point in the Four Thoughts where, I forget who the author of this particular piece was. They're saying that we're on the fourth thought now, where we're looking at all of samsara, which is really the world of confusion. That's my personal favorite title for that realm. It's like, it's the world of confusion. At its best, we've just been fooled, and we don't know it yet. That's at its best. And if we're not careful, we're going to make things worse for ourselves and worse for others. So we don't have the discerning wisdom yet, but we're recognizing, whoa, it isn't just this country or some other country or this planet. It's like it's beyond global. And at its best, it's still confused. And sometimes it accidentally brings benefit. Well, we all do that accidentally all the time. I intended to do something bad and something good came. I can't help it. That happens too. But all that says is, yes, it's just the world of confusion. So what are you going to do? You're going to throw fuel on it, or you're going to put it out somehow. What we think we'd like to do is the heroic march against others' confusion. Right? I would like to be responsible for eliminating your confusion. If you'll just step up, we'll take care of it now. And we know it's just blowhard baloney. It doesn't work. So there's really only, the drive all blame into one is really about the teaching. There's only one person that needs to clarify their confusion. That's all. You clarify your own. The rest will take care of itself. Why will it take care of itself? Because if you actually do manage to clarify your own, you will be an example of clarity rather than confusion, which will then become a cause for somebody to, I would like to be like that. In its simplest form, we try to emulate certain people and avoid the characteristics of others. And the more that the emulation is going in the direction of clarity, the better. And the more it's going in the other direction, the more it tends to flow in that direction. Pretty simple. So the fifth thing is to recognize this is the nature of samsara. This is what samsara is. It's about confusion. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's about war and killing and maiming and sickness and famine and all. Definitely it's that too. But that's just incidental. It's also just about that sense that we have sometimes when there was just too much to deal with. We just feel like, I don't know how I'll ever get out of this confusion. It just seems like I'm locked into four walls and a top and a bottom. So we need to have a method for getting out of that. And that brings us the full circle, and we can contemplate it then. And this is my own kind of favorite approach to it. We have a teaching called the Four Immeasurables. And the Four Immeasurables, many great teachers will say, this is really the foundation of the entire Mahayana. And you want to clarify your confusion, you practice these four immeasurables. So the first one is about, I'm going to call the first one the last one, which is the actual direction that they are taught in often, though they're never listed in that direction. The foundation of the four immeasurables is first and foremost equanimity. Equanimity. Like you must have a sense that everyone's confusion is equal. Like other people's confusion is not more than mine, nor less than mine. It's right there, it's equal. They deserve to be free of it, no matter what they have done in this life, or any other life, which I can't see anyway, but just looking in this life, I think no matter what I see, my practice is equanimity. They deserve to be free of their confusion and the causes of suffering. No matter if they were Adolf Hitler, it doesn't matter who they were or what they did. They deserve to be free of it. And so that's a big piece right there. So what does freedom of it look like? I don't know what it looks like, but what I know is that it will be helpful if I think and act towards them with loving kindness. That will be helpful, even if I don't know where it goes. Secondly, when I see their suffering, I relate to them with compassion, not with judgment about they deserve that. In fact, they deserve even more than that. Wrong direction. And then we have the joyous piece. So we have loving kindness and compassion and joy are the three of the four. And the joy is described in various ways. My favorite description of joy is that it's all about rejoicing whenever in the virtues of others. It's really what it is. It's part of the 7-branch prayer, if you know that. Rejoicing in the virtues of others. So that's the joyous piece. When you see somebody do something, this is basically the practice behind it. When you see somebody do something, no matter what their stature in life is, no matter what they've done, again, whatever it is, if you see them do something, even if there's somebody who, generally speaking, you would be surprised to see them do something virtuous. So sometimes we might say, well, everybody will do something virtuous from time to time by accident. So then we think to ourselves, they didn't really mean to do that. They're not actually a virtuous person. We draw the opposite conclusion. We see the virtue, we hold the wish that it would just keep rolling like that, just keep going. It's the joy around not just the virtue, but the joy around the effect of virtue. Kind of like the causes of happiness are there, and so we rejoice. We rejoice on their behalf, and we feel good about that, and they feel good about being the source of rejoicing, cause of rejoicing. And all of that cannot happen without equanimity. Well, I think the truth is, it can happen a little bit as we learn to do these things, but the idea is that we create a conflagration of it. We want a wildfire of equanimity, compassion, joy, loving kindness. And that's the antidote to the causes of samsara. Those 4 are the foundation of so many of the higher practices, the ones that you have to have so many prerequisites to do. And yet they're so easy to understand that sometimes we think, I want something more advanced than that. There would be no Vajrayana, I don't think, no Mahayana, if it weren't for those practices. So you can enter the door of that from any place, the basement, the roof, anywhere, and you're in it. I rest my case.
I want to mention just something about
Yeah.
the basic setup of the question, which was, we can't really have discerning wisdom. Yeah. And you're quite right. We can't. And it's never said that we actually attain enlightenment solely from the relative perspective. So but we seem to be very drawn to a perspective where we would have certainty in ordinary terms about what we're doing. That I really want to know that I'm doing the right thing. And the option that you offered was, we do our best, and then we see what happens. And in that, if we're willing to surrender a little bit of the need for certainty, the more we're willing to surrender that, the more likely it is that we'll actually see what happened. As opposed to saying, no, I must have been right, because I picked the right thing to do, therefore I must have been right, therefore what happened must be okay. So if we surrender that and just look, then the panorama opens up, and we can go deeper and deeper into what arises as things open up. So, but it's that's one of the things that I often hear is some version of this tension between, well, can we really get there from here? And I really do want to get there, and I'd love to be, I'd love it if we could, just all learn the right things to do and everything would just be nailed down. but then we have this sneaking suspicion that's not the whole project. And we're right, but that's the door into the door into it is through that. But it's just seeing it as it opens up along the way.
So it's all just practice.
Yeah.
It's training.
Yeah. I think it's one of the nice things about the four thoughts is that they are the most fundamental preliminary to every other practice. Now, there isn't any practice that you do that doesn't have as a preliminary really the four thoughts. Like if you don't appreciate having a human existence, if you don't understand those four thoughts, it's going to be difficult to go far in almost any practice. So it's why we often call it the ordinary foundation. Ordinary not in the sense that it's just ordinary, but ordinary in the sense that it's ubiquitous. It's just everywhere. That's also why we don't want to do it. We want to move on to the high practices. And then it's like the joke on the long retreat is that they're into the most advanced practices, and the next 2 months is you do the four thoughts. It's like, what? There must be some mistake here. That's not the ticket I bought.
The Xerox machine collated this curriculum in the wrong order. But the lack of having some abandoning some sense of certainty about having learned the four thoughts is important.
Yeah.
Would you say that again?
Abandoning certainty that we've learned the four thoughts is essential. That's actually oh yeah. It's like because you mentioned it's worth repeating the thing that you mentioned about the relationship between impermanence and emptiness. That's something you mentioned in passing during this morning, that actually if you really keep looking more and more closely, as opposed to reciting the catechism of we all going to die, we all going to die, we all going to die, that's impermanence, now next. If we actually really do look at the experience of impermanence and look closer and closer and more just without saying, oh, now I get it, then it leads deeper and deeper. There are times when I've thought, I've actually sort of done the logical proof to myself that all four of the four thoughts could in and of each one could be the pointing out instruction for Mahamudra.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Each one. So
I do think that's true.
that should go, ooh, I guess I'm not quite open to the possibilities of my contemplation.
So is a recommendation to do all four thoughts every day? Or
Yeah.
all four?
Well, you can do first. I think rather than say yes, do them all day long, or every day, or whatever. I think that there's a little bit of a cultural thing here. Tibetans sometimes will say that the virtue in counting what you're doing, like counting prostrations or mantras, whatever it is, the virtue is actually in the counting. Now, many Tibetans will say that. It's actually in the counting. And, of course, you have to do it correctly and all, but if you only do one, it's not as good as two, and three is even better, and so on. And I think that many in the West get some benefit by virtue of coming to a sense of understanding why you would do that thing anyway at all, as opposed to it's just good to count something, you don't even understand it yet. And maybe you never do come to understand it because you get irritated by not understanding it, and so you stop. There's all sorts of dead ends. So I think it's good to ask the question, why do I contemplate the four thoughts? And then you can answer the next question yourself. Should I do it every day? You can answer that question by doing it every day for a while and seeing like, is this helpful? What am I getting here? Because my sense is that whatever you're doing, you should be getting something from it. Not every day necessarily, not every minute certainly, but a certain sense of why you would do that thing. And that you're doing it, and so you're having a sense of, yes, that's what's coming from it. I feel like that's so important, and it is a kind of a cultural thing. Generally speaking, we do better when we understand why we're doing something. And you can kind of do it through brute force, like I just do 500 prostrations a day, let's say. I actually have no idea why I'm doing it. I think that if you did that long enough, you'd find the reason why you're doing it. Whether or not you'd live that long. But I think generally the practices are like that. Is that if you do them enough, as Boka Rinpoche used to say, so inspirationally for me it was, because it never worked. And I look at him and say, clearly it worked for him, it's got to work for me too. But I think in a way it never has. It's like he would say, don't worry so much about what the practice means and what all of these things are. You do the practice and the truth will reveal itself. I think there is a truth in that for sure. But you have to get to the place where the truth reveals itself. It isn't just automatic. And sometimes we need some help along the way. It's good to get some help so that we can feel like, oh, I see what it is. We need an occasional dose of, aha, I get it. If you never get that, I think you're on a dead end. It's going to be really hard. You're either going to get it on your own, or it's just not. You're going to quit at some point. And the people who don't quit, I think they got it. I don't mean that they got enlightened necessarily, but they saw the connection between doing something and something that came from it. You can't just run the dry thing forever. So I think that the four thoughts being the most ubiquitous, ordinary foundation practice. I don't think there's anything more ubiquitous is there, than the four thoughts. They're just everywhere. Then I think it's good to do those things regularly. Whether it's every day or not, I don't know. Could be. But in order for that to be a good thing to do, you need to know why you're doing it. And the nice thing about the four thoughts is, I think everybody in this room, and mostly everyone who comes into this room ever, can understand what those four thoughts are about in a way which works for them. So they can feel like, I see what it is. I'm 30 years old, as I can say this, when I was 30 years old, I had absolutely zero appreciation for the fact that I was a human being. Of course I'm a human being. What else would I be? There was none whatsoever of, well, it could have been something else. When that cynicism melted into the place of, yeah, it could have been something else, and then think about this, it was something else. And during that time, things were not so good.
My very own Warring States period.
Yeah, right. Or my own personal example is that when our retreat was over, there was a guy who came and was showing us some things about the forest in the area where the retreat was, and he took us out in the forest, and he was showing us something which was like it was really difficult to watch. I had no idea this was going to happen, but he had a couple of voles. You know what a vole is? Mm-hmm. So he had a couple of voles, and he had done this so often that he could hold them up in his hand, and this hawk would come down and get them and literally eat them right there on his hand.
Oh my God.
And it was like gasp, like, it was just like, I don't want to see this. Okay, I get this goes on all the time in the woods. I'm still having a hard time with it. And so I don't know why I said that, but I had a reason and now I got it.
Sounds
It's
like
all-
There was
It's too late to take it back.
Yeah.
There's something to do with, I think, with your own personal example of having had a previous life.
That was it.
Right.
That was it. Yeah.
As a
Could,
vole.
Yeah.
you could have been born as a mole.
Then I thought,
It helped out.
and my sense of characteristic for a vole is that my own narrative around it is, this is an animal that somehow knows it will never make it to a natural death. That it will die a violent death for certain, and it's right. It will never make it. Snakes and birds, it's finished. It's lucky to get just a few steps into a life and it's gone. And
Never went to college.
That is a natural death for them then.
well, sort of, it's a natural death, but if it was in a cage in your home as a pet, it would last a lot longer. And so that's what I ended up contemplating as, like, you were something before. The vole is what came to mind for me in particular. Like, yeah, that's a terrible life. Like, constantly looking all the time. They barely spend any time eating, but constantly foraging. But most of their energy is put into, is there a shadow in the sky? And it's like looking to see. And then, sure enough, at some point, it's over. So I think that's that we are. You can feel a sense of appreciation when you look at those things. That I am born a human being. Now, my karma from past lives has brought me to the place of a human being. What can I do that's better than what I did before? What can I do? Because what I have today is not by virtue of what I did this morning or what I did last year, but what I did a long time ago. Like that thing of the teaching that the majority of the karma that ripens in this life is from previous lives. The first time I heard that didn't make any sense. How could that possibly be? And then you take the boundary off of things and you realize it's obvious, it's a mathematical certainty. It couldn't be any other way. So now how do you get discriminating wisdom into that? Discriminating wisdom is about distinguishing between what would be a good thing to do as opposed to not so good, and doing the thing that's good with a sense of understanding, even without the evidence. I mean, the truth is, most of what we do without any evidence for it. But it's good to be clear about that. That most of what we do with no evidence. Without any evidence, we can see what would be good to do. That's the whole system of ethics in Buddhism. It's like, how do you develop discriminating wisdom so that you do with your body, speech, and mind now what will create the causes and conditions for something much better in the future. We don't have any way to kind of prove that in the moment, but we can see by virtue of the microcosm that we work in now, that certain things work. It's as close as we can get to it. And then, of course, if you have confidence in the Buddha, which, no judgment about that if you don't, but I think those things come gradually, and then we can start to engage in at least the hypothetical of it. I can see how my actions bring benefit and harm today, so I should therefore be able to see what would bring harm and good in the not too distant future. I find it easier to extrapolate from that than to rely upon even the idea that there would be an unbounded perspective. In other words, if you can witness the good that comes from what you do, then why not do more of that? Do you really need to connect the uncountable dots between things to prove to yourself that that was good? I mean, most of us can figure that out in a microcosm rather than needing a whole big explanation and a lot of proof and things. As somebody once said to me, it's like, if I needed proof, I never would have gone to Japan, because I didn't see it. I didn't know that it was there. I took the evidence from my father, who said, you need to get on this airplane and go to Japan. I'm talking about somebody else, but I think we do that all the time. Function on the basis of an assumption that something's there when we have no direct personal evidence of it. Okay?
Michael, how, in the moment of doing good, I often experience this like quick little flush of affirming my sense of self, like, ooh, look at
Yeah.
Is there a quick antidote?
Actually, the
oh.
antidote is right where what you just did.
Okay.
The antidote is seeing it. The problem is not the sense of self that we have so much as our attachment to it, and our extrapolating and elaborating, justifying ourselves, and there's all of these things. The sense of the existence of ourself. There's a lot of teachings that say, not only can you not stop that with intention, the intention itself is just another extension of that sense of self. So it's much worse than you thought.
That's why I would have answered the opposite. No, there isn't a quick way out.
Yeah. Seeing.
Yeah.
Seeing, is throughout the entire path. Every gradation of it has a sense of awareness of something, even when it's bad, is good. So when I see, whoa, I did really good, now all I need to do is just kind of parse that. First of all, yes, that was good. Now, what do you want to poison it with the self? No. So little by little you see, I see it. I see the poison. The poison is transformed to good in the seeing. Before it has a chance to be ruined, you just see it. You're not going to escape having the experience of self. That's like way down the road. But it's not so far that you can have the experience of no self periodically, and then the pitfall is pretty much the same. We have the experience of no self. It's authentic. We actually do have that experience. And then we see that we have the experience, and then we say, aha, that's me. I did it. So, and what are you doing now?
Gritting my teeth.
Oh, gritting.
Yeah.
Not so good. The laughter was better. You gotta laugh at it, because it's just so natural to have that experience. One might actually say, I think there's some validity in this also. Those individuals in the history of the world who had no sense of self aren't here to report it. What happens when you live in the jungle and you hear a twig snap behind you? Do you just turn around and say, oh, there's a tiger about to eat me? It's okay. Go ahead, eat me. If you don't have any sense of self, you're dead. At least you used to be. Like, you can't survive that in a world of predators where you're kind of one of the early humans, with not very fast, not very smart, not very this and that, and the cat's got all the cards, so you're finished. And in a certain way, that still to some degree holds true. You need to see the mistake of, I'm solidifying a sense of who I am. And in the moment that you see it, you're not solidifying. In the next moment you see, oh, I'm not solidifying. Well, that's solidifying. So we can get into a logical trap in this thing where it just goes in a circle, kind of like the bowl running in the wheel, There's no benefit to it. You see it. My antidote is, I see it, I laugh. Kind of like, yeah, I see you. I see what you're doing. It's okay, running the wheel all you want. And then just let it go. And you know it's going to happen again. And the game is, can I see it? Can I see it? Can I see it? Every time you see what's going on with your mind, whether it's virtuous, ugly, terrible, neutral, every time you just see it, it's virtue.
This is very much the same thing as the piece about can we really have discerning wisdom?
Yeah.
This is a good example. Like sort of like, oh, now I've heard the same question 2 times.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get drawn into that, and that I want to get it right. But it just but the kind of the humor of it and the lightness of it really is essential. Kind of a lightness about it is totally.
If there's no lightness, then you really have to laugh. And basically what you're saying is, it's not funny.
So when you're dealing though with, I guess it's the same thing, this is like, okay, for instance, this morning, early, and I was fussing with something in my mind, just fussing with it, but then something else, oh, fussing about that, and I was like, and then so all of a sudden I was like, you're doing that thing now that you do. I just felt so stuck, and it was like it made me feel kind of exhausted for a minute. And then I thought, so that's great, I saw it, but I know I'm going to do it again. So it's like, how do you, like, when does that stop?
Don't ask. Don't ask. It's the wrong question.
Laughter may be but compassion is a good response too.
What is?
I mean, compassion, having compassion
for yourself.
for ourselves.
Yeah.
For having, it's again, okay. Yeah. Okay.
It's potentially a kind of egotistical thing, like if you really indulged in it every time that something happened, that may not be so good. But generally speaking, there's no one more worthy of compassion than ourselves. Why not? You're holding the aspiration to benefit all beings. It doesn't always work. What are you going to do? Be angry at the other person for not being a suitable receptacle of my loving kindness.
But aren't all of these things related to the fact that we are human and we are bound in bodies at this level? And those bodies have their weaknesses and their survival skills, the things that they need. And laughter, if you can see it, laughter really is the best antidote. You can't help being human. That's what you are. It's in your nature to do these things again and again and again. And until you can see them, and it doesn't, you see them and then you're doing it again. That's just part of your nature, and so to have compassion for yourself or to laugh, it's the only way to deal.
Yeah. It's compassionate to notice, also, just to see is a kind of compassion. I mean, in a certain sense, that's almost the definition of compassion. see that clearly.
It's funny that we are much more able to do that seeing if we look at others, but when we look at ourselves, we are inclined not to.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay. Now what?
Yeah.
I have a challenge to throw out,
Oh, really?
which is that we usually think of the four thoughts. We speak in terms like the foundation, preparation, and there's always this implication of in order to. That we do this, then, and the rest of our practice, the kind of the real practice will go better. But I would throw out the challenge, you could just turn the whole thing on its head and think of all the practice that we do could be preparation for deep insight into the four thoughts.
Yeah.
So you just kind of reverse the whole thing. And it came to me, your question kind of provoked this, kind of like, oh yeah, we should think about the four thoughts every day. And I was thinking, well, there's ways, all the practices that we do will actually kind of provide solvent in that. Then just our shamatha practice alone is a crucial way to actually get in contact with impermanence.
Everything we do all day long is part of the four thoughts.
It's part of the stuff.
If you bring your awareness to it.
So that shifts it, sort of turns it on its head, and these are some really profound principles in practice, and everything that we do could actually be a foundation for deepening that.
So does the observation of impermanence,
You have to speak up.
we did the meditation where we were observing change, observing change, witnessing change. Does that lead to insight practice? Is that, and should we go there?
What is insight practice?
That's a good question. I had a teaching long ago on insight practice, really looking at the looker, looking for the looker.
Looking at the looker, yeah. That's good. Yeah.
And so when we were doing it this morning, I just was looking at all of the impermanence, and boy, it was, I don't usually look that deeply at, there's a twinge in my knee, there's something pressing in my eye, there's something in my throat, I don't usually look that closely at all of those kinds of things changing like I did this morning in that meditation. But then I almost wanted to look at the looker, or look for the looker, or kind of...
And? Did you do that?
No, I stayed with the instruction.
Oh, because the instruction said don't do that?
The instruction always says, do not attain enlightenment.
Stop here. Well, I think this is what Bill was referring to. It's like any of these practices can be used to point out non-moving.
Is that what, every discipline has its own set of pitfalls that are unique to it. And I often think of the practices that we call insight practice as being fraught with pitfalls. Actually, it in itself is not fraught with any pitfall at all, but since those practices are ostensibly what you do in order to have insight into the nature of the mind, and therefore they're rather exalted practices, we tend to relate to them in a different way than the four thoughts, for example. anything could be an insight practice, like what Bill was saying. Anything could be an insight practice. It really depends. And the farther you go in that direction, it more and more depends upon exactly where, and I'll just say the meditator is, exactly where they are. So I don't know how to parse or distinguish practices so much, is because personally, I'm kind of in a place with my own practice, and making more inroads into kind of like the lower and the practices that are not particularly exalted. It's been like that for a couple of years, and so I have trouble distinguishing a little bit, because I think that if you've done practice, you can see like there are insights to be had in any of the practices that we have. None of them are like space holders or not worthy of doing it somehow, you know. And I confess that a long time ago, I did feel that way. I felt like, oh, I want to get to this practice. I want to get, and one by one, you get to that practice in it, and somehow you feel like you've been betrayed. Like they said there were jewels lying all over the ground. I haven't found one. And so it became clear, like there's some reason behind those practices, and to some degree, I think I also kind of tricked myself in some ways, like the cultural issues don't matter. I felt that really strong for a long period of time, that I could like ignore the cultural issues. But actually, whatever issue stands in the way, you can't ignore. It doesn't matter what it is. If you're hungry, you need to eat. You need to do something, whatever it is. So I think, for example, a precious human existence can, from my own perspective, best be carried as a view. That is to say, if I was a vole,
When you were a vole.
when I was a vole, I have no recollection of that. So, but if I was a vole, there could be an insight practice there for a vole. Vole insight. I actually think that any being at the right place at the right time with whatever mind that being has, it's possible that they could have deep insight from something. And if we look at our own lives, I think we'll all find, like, I think I've had these insights and those things, and they didn't necessarily come from doing Buddhist practice, or maybe they did, but I didn't notice them as useful at the time. I find it useful to take a practice like what we've been talking about, a precious human existence, and in one sense, I don't have much relationship with it. I'm happy to be a human. I'm happy to be reasonably educated, to have enough to eat, to, all the things that most of us have. I'm happy enough with that. But if I sit down to do the practice of precious human existence, the word precious is the thing that makes it different. Why is it precious? We don't say it's precious just to be a human. To merely be a human is not a precious human existence. It's a human existence, but it's not a precious human existence. In order for it to be a precious human existence, we have to have some other things. And so, but again, I have to keep going back to the place of, I first have to have some appreciation for being a human at all. Otherwise, those other things are not clicking into place somehow. So it's that kind of exploration of how does this practice work for me? Does it work this way for others? And so on. So I never did that in the first 30 years. I just never did. I look at those four thoughts and I had the same sense that most people had. I did those. Yeah, I get them. Easy to explain, easy to know, easy to all those things. But there's no blood in it. There's nothing living going through it. It's kind of like a thought. It's a concept of some kind. So replace the concept with the view that precious means that you embody an appreciation for having a precious human existence, and then embellish it in a way which demands that you have a different relationship with it. Like, the reason I have a precious human existence is because I had a mother who did X, Y, and Z, or a father. And I was born into this place by virtue of connections, relationships with these kinds of people who I don't even know, but surely I had them. And I'm surely surrounded by them, even though I only know them by name, I don't know who they are. So that we sort of extend ourselves out and have a sense of, I would have nothing today if it weren't for the large number of benefactors who taught the Dharma, who showed up, who exemplified it, who did this, who did that, and all of these things, these acts of kindness that they devoted their life to helping other people. And somehow I managed to walk through their radiance and have some warmth from it, and something stuck. And so then I'm thinking the way to make the precious human existence is to feel a sense of almost unbearable gratitude. So we have to seed these things in our stream of consciousness. Otherwise they don't grow. They're like any other seed. So you find these things that work for you, and you just you plant those seeds by contemplating them, and then you nurture them by remembering them and elaborating on it. And I think that many people who have had good connections and deep connections with great teachers will say that's how it works. It's like you don't just have devotion out of nothing. It doesn't fall out of the sky somehow. If it does, there's probably something slightly not quite right about it. Like, oh, I need to have devotion, so I'll look to myself like I have it somehow. But it really needs to be somehow authentic. It's like you can't make it, like you can't make flowers in your backyard, but you can plant the seeds and nurture the seeds. That's what you get to do. It's not so easy to discover what the seeds are, or how to plant them, or how to nurture them, but we all know how to work that little by little and get good at it. And the result gradually comes from it. Grab the things that grab you. Like today we mentioned the thing of Bokar Rinpoche saying, well, the truth will reveal itself. Just engage in the practice. The truth will reveal itself. I heard Bokar Rinpoche say that probably 3 or 4 times. And the first 2 or 3 times, it was like, nothing. And then once somehow, it like the plane flew into me. And it's like, I just felt like I'd been crashed into. It was like, I see what it is. I thought he was just saying, don't worry about it, everything will be okay. It was kind of like, I don't have time for this. Do the thing.
Run along, Michael.
Yeah. Every time, when I think back about it, I realize every time that he said that 2 or 3 or 4 times that I've heard it, like 2 or 3 of those times just they didn't do anything.
Let's bring karma.
Yeah.
That's why he kept saying
You
it.
just, you do what you can with it, and in a certain sense, for all of us, it's like people on a long retreat. I always, when people get like, I'm going to leave the retreat now or something, it's the fundamental game is that they need to hear that the difference between those who stay and those who leave is that those who stay get the goods. Those who don't. And so it's not about do you like it or not like it. It's about you stay, you continue, you work it, you will get the goods. It doesn't mean you'll get enlightened, but you will get the benefit enough so that you can say that was really worth it. Whether it was a day, a month, a year, 3 years, whatever it is, that was really worth that, doing that. You can't get that by leaving. So you have to just kind of keep at it until it happens, until the flowers grow and you figure out how to nurture them and you have a garden. You have to. And that's the role of the Sangha. It's like nurture each other. Nurture each other. Pay attention. Don't assume everybody's okay. Don't assume they're not okay. Try to be mature and skillful, discriminating, if you will, and our mutual nurturing to carry on with it. Sometimes we do well and sometimes we don't do so good. So then we have to notice that too and just say, we're doing the best we can. Yeah, it's okay. Go have a cup of coffee or tea or something.
It's time.
Yeah, it is time. We'll dedicate the merit, take a break, and then have our last session.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
To get
Okay.
enough. I was just wondering if streaming worked. Got the streaming going?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I thought you were talking to Jeff.
Oh, this is